Hi everyone, today I'm going to bring to you a presentation um, about why Putin needs to be stopped. By stopped, I mean Russia needs to, and Russians need to depose this person. They need to get rid of his regime and adopt a regime that's less autocratic, more democratic, and more open to the West. So with that said, let's begin. Now, as you can see, um, I put Putin in the company of a couple of dictators, and my purpose here is not to compare him to the atrocities that the other two fellows did. Uh, the reason why these three kind of go together is because of the way their thought process works. Basically, they were all megalomaniacs, meaning they thought of themselves as uh, nothing greater than them could exist, nothing more perfect than them could exist. Putin kind of thinks the same way, and the only thing that these people understand is force, and I mean autocratic leaders as the ones that you see on your screen here. The only thing that they understand is force. Uh, they're control freaks. They take matters into their own hands, and they do not listen to their experts at all. Um, and quite often, more often than not, they're mad, maniacs, murderous, and thugs, pure thugs. Um, so the fellow on the extreme right, Mussolini, um, he made a similar mistake to Putin. He took a look at Greece. On paper, Greece had no armed forces whatsoever. He tried to invade Greece, and he learned his lesson. Putin, I don't think he has yet to learn his lesson. Let's not mention the other murderous thug that murdered 6 million uh, Jews, if not more. And from a military perspective, he thought he was better than his generals, invaded Russia, and he got his just deserves. Now we have Putin, and Putin also underestimated um, the Ukraine. And it's apparent now from the stories that are coming out of the Ukraine that his forces uh, did incur heavy casualties, heavy losses. He completely underestimated the West. Um, however, however, where my analysis differs from the West is that even though he incurred Uh, my feeling is even though that Russia incurred heavy losses so far in the first 36 or so days in their war against Ukraine, he has far from stopped or given up, and to uh, he needs to realize that there should be a way out, and the way out should be by surrendering and making peace. And he needs to be forced to do that. He won't do it voluntarily. He already uh, threatened the world with nuclear weapons, and he already stated that his intentions are to roll back NATO to how things were just after the Iron Curtain fell. So I have a hard time believing that despite the casualties that he incurred, this fellow, Mr. Putin, has given up and put things to rest. And as I said before, the only thing this fellow will realize is strength and force. And if we continue to appease him, he will never stop. And the comparison where I'd like to draw there is Nazi Germany pre World War II to Putin's Russia. So we all know that World War II started with the invasion of Poland in September 1939. But prior to uh, Poland's invasion, in 1936, Nazi Germany took over the Rhineland. And of course, the French in that point did not oppose Hitler and his forces because they were afraid of a wider conflict, just like we are afraid of a wider conflict at the present time with Russia. So what did Nazi Germany do next? In 1938, they advanced into Austria. Well, you as Austrians, you're the same thing as Germans. We speak the same language. We're the same country. There you go. What did the so-called West do at that point? The Anglo-American forces, the French, absolutely nothing. Well, Mr. H, do you want Austria? You can have it. We just don't want a world conflict. In 1938, Sudetenland. Sure, that part of Czechoslovakia was inhabited by German-speaking uh, people. For that matter, so was Prussia or Danzig at that given point in time. Doesn't mean you can walk in there with your forces and take it over. Sudetenland followed by Czechoslovakia. And that's where Mr. Chamberlain had his little promise on a piece of paper. And what was that paper worth? Absolutely nothing. And of course, what eventually followed was Poland in a global conflict. Putin's Russia seems to have followed the same lines. First, it was the Chechen War, and in Chechnya, it was virtually flattened. Um, then was the Russo-Georgian War, and that wasn't as bloody as the Ukraine, but it's still, you know, signs that Putin is ready to go to war and risk a wider conflict should he not be stopped eventually. And as we know, Crimea and Donbass in Ukraine, and what next? That's what is worrying me. What next? If this fellow is not given a red line, a clear red line that he should not cross, what will come next in Putin's mind? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my greatest fear for myself and my family. Let's move along. Now, there has been misinformation on both sides. Uh, the greatest sniper of all was pronounced dead, unbeknown to him. That was Russian propaganda. And the Ghost of Kiev as well. Turns out that it was a training exercise and not a real event. Um, and as things are unfolding now, there has been a retreat, uh, but uh, there is also, according to Western sources, which I find credible, and along the lines of what Putin is capable of or what Putin is thinking, that the Russian forces are regrouping, and instead of going for a pincer movement, which has proven uh, rather dubious and fatal, and I don't think that Putin no longer trusts any longer the Belarusian front as well, and to get his supplies there um, promptly. I truly believe that due to corruption in Belarus, some of the supplies that were supposed to go to the Russian forces went elsewhere. That was a major fail as well. And he seems to be going now for a frontal assault, which again is insane. So I'm addressing this point because, at least in the West, we have to strive for steering clear from censorship and being open. But at the same token, we need to be wary of Putin's talking heads. Um, I find it abhorrent that a African American that's simply driving his vehicle, be it a BMW or a Honda Civic, can be stopped for suspicion on our streets so often. But despite all the clear indicators that Mr. Trump is in bed with Mr. Putin, He isn't stopped. He's not arrested. He's not thrown in jail. We have no evidence to the effect of collusion with Russia, and I find that hard to believe, completely hard to believe. For example, we have all these hackers in India scamming people in North America, and the police throw up their hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do. But then you have engineers that can reverse the fortunes of those scammers. Why aren't we taking more action against these fifth columnists that seems to be apologetic to Putin and even promote his perspective? It's remarkable. I don't believe in censorship, but this is blatant treason. Treason. There's no other word for it. And so we have the fellows from the Duran that are pro-Putin from the get-go, spinning conspiracy theories. One of them is also a disgraced lawyer from the UK. Let's not go to Tucker. Tucker is laughable, completely laughable, and he makes me nauseous. So, but yeah, despite their perspective, they do shed some light and some truth, especially with respect to um, bringing out the fact that there is Russophobia. And I want to make one thing clear. I have friends from Russia. I have friends from the Ukraine. I have ancestral roots in that area as well. And I love both peoples. But I really dislike Putin. I really dislike Putin, and I dislike neo-Nazis, uh, quote unquote, the Azov Battalion. So, what does the world need to do? Well, we need to make it clear to Mr. Putin that occupation of Ukrainian terrain will not be tolerated. Given the bloodshed that has occurred now, all the civilian deaths, there is no room for Russian forces on Ukrainian soil, be that the Donbas region, be that the Crimea. They need to give up that terrain to Ukraine. We need to establish that the world is not challenging Russian existence. And to think that anybody can invade Russia and win a war against Russia, it's completely impossible. Nobody has ever succeeded in conquering Russia. It's geographically, physically an unattainable goal. Forget it. Um, the hostilities need to end by a given date. Uh, that I think is the red line that Putin should not cross. Listen, you need to come to the peace table, get a peace agreement done by such a date. If you're still in the Ukraine on that date, we'll take action. And if he is capable of threatening Armageddon to us, then what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's unfortunate, but you cannot risk another appeasement, the perception that we are appeasing him so he can escalate and take the initiative against us. We need to address Russia's security concerns regarding NATO. The Warsaw Pact was defunct after the Iron Curtain had collapsed. What's the purpose of NATO? What's the purpose of always putting the knife under Russia's jugular, or perceived to be doing that? Was NATO really necessary as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, whose initial um, intent was to protect us against a Soviet invasion? Uh, Given that the Soviet threat collapsed, NATO should have been reorganized to fit another purpose. Establish guidelines and a roadmap for a European army and a European Union that includes Russia, that rather than alienating them. If the EU is so good and it's so transparent then it needs to spread to other countries, um, and countries need to adopt to more global organizations like the OECD, and adopt more tax treaties, um, and realize that we are living in an interdependent world. Without a Ukraine, we have a strong risk of incurring worldwide famine, um, and the spread of disease. Peace and a peace dividend is um, indispensable to the entire world. And we can't do that alone. We need to depend on our brothers and sisters to make it happen. So, another little thought is that uh, I have a lot of Russian YouTube uh, friends, quote unquote friends, that I subscribe to. And the past week or so, they've been showing how Russia has been affected by the sanctions, empty shelves, closed commerces, um, lack of food on the shelves. To those folks, what I'd like to tell you is that in the Ukraine now, there are children that will never see their mom and dad. There are people, civilians, that died needlessly. There are entire shopping centers and residential areas that have been obliterated by Russian artillery and bombs. You need to realize that. You need to realize that the road ahead, the future for Russia, under the likes of a Putin and a Lavrov, is very dark and bleak, with or without war. It'll be a horrendous future for Russia. You need to take power. You need to rise against tyranny. And you need to depose this autocratic lunatic, psychopath. Get rid of him. Have a great weekend, everyone.